There is a particular kind of frustration that is almost impossible to explain to people who have never felt it. It is not the frustration of failing. It is not the frustration of being unlucky or overlooked. It is something quieter. It is the frustration of watching your own life happen to you, of waking up year after year with the same vague sense that things should be different by now, of working hard, trying hard, caring deeply, and still ending up somewhere you did not choose. Most people experience this, but what most people do not realize is that the frustration is not the problem. It is a signal. The gap between two very different ways of moving through the world becoming visible. Because here is what psychology and cognitive science have found after decades of studying people who consistently build the lives they want versus people who end up living lives they only half chose. The difference is almost never talent, almost never luck, almost never resources. The difference, almost universally, is a specific way of thinking. A set of mental habits so consistent that researchers can identify them in advance and predict outcomes with remarkable accuracy. And the people who think this way are not always the loudest in the room. Many of them spent years being told they were too much in their heads, too cautious, too deliberate, too slow. But what looked like overthinking was actually something else entirely. Today we look at 9 ways of thinking that research consistently finds in people who build intentional, self-directed lives. And if you are the kind of person drawn to a video like this, several of these are very likely already running inside you. Not as goals to adopt, as things you already do, without having been given the language to recognize them as the strategic advantages they actually are. This is that language. Way 1. You think about your thinking. Most people are completely inside their thoughts. A belief forms, an assumption takes root, a reaction fires, and they respond to all of it as if it were simply reality. But there is a different kind of mind, one that watches itself think, that catches a belief forming and asks where it came from, that notices an assumption and asks whether it is still accurate. Psychologists call this metacognition. Research from Stanford found that people with high metacognitive awareness made significantly better decisions under uncertainty than people with equivalent intelligence who lacked this capacity. Not because they had more information, because they knew more accurately what they did and did not know, and sought the right information before committing. Every time you have paused before a decision and asked yourself what you are actually doing and why, you are not being indecisive. You are being accurate. And accuracy over a life compounds in ways that speed alone cannot match. Way 2. You play the long game without being told to. Walter Mischel's marshmallow studies at Stanford found that children who could delay gratification had significantly better outcomes across nearly every dimension of adult life. But those children were not simply exercising willpower. They were holding a mental representation of a future state and allowing it to override the pull of the present. They were thinking strategically about time. Research by Kahneman and Tversky on temporal discounting showed that most people dramatically overvalue the present relative to the future. The brain defaults to the immediate and concrete over the distant and abstract. But some minds naturally resist this. They are bothered by choices that feel good now, but lead nowhere worth going. They are drawn to paths that look unremarkable today, but compound into something significant over time. If you have ever made a choice no one around you immediately understood, one that looked like delay from the outside, but felt like direction from the inside, you know exactly what this feels like. Way 3. You treat your beliefs as hypotheses rather than identities. Most people experience their beliefs as part of who they are. To challenge a belief is to challenge the person. But strategic thinkers hold beliefs the way scientists hold hypotheses, as the current best explanation, as working models to be tested and updated when experience demands it. Carol Dweck's research on growth versus fixed mindset maps directly here. People with a fixed mindset avoid challenges and experience changing their mind as defeat. People with a growth mindset treat beliefs as starting points. They understand that the discomfort of being wrong today is far cheaper than operating on a wrong belief for the next decade. If you have ever changed your mind on something important and felt not shame but relief, not weakness but clarity, you have experienced this way of thinking from the inside. Most people never get there. The ones who do build lives that keep getting better, rather than simply getting longer. Way 4. You reverse engineer outcomes instead of chasing processes. Most people pursue goals by finding what successful people do and imitating those behaviors. This works in simple environments, but in complex ones, where most meaningful life decisions live, it has a fundamental flaw. It gives you a map drawn for someone else's terrain. Cognitive psychologist Gary Klein found in his research on expert decision makers that what separates experts from novices is not better checklists. Experts build mental models of desired outcomes and reason backward to actions from there. They understand the mechanism before committing to the process. In life terms, this means not deciding you want a different career and immediately updating your resume. It means first building a precise picture of what your working life needs to look like in 10 years to feel genuinely satisfying. Then identifying what conditions would make that possible. Then working backward to what needs to happen right now for the first link in that chain to form. Way 5. You know the difference between what you want and what you have been told to want. Most people carry desires that feel entirely their own, but are significantly shaped by parental expectations absorbed before they could evaluate them. Social comparison that defined success as whatever the most visible people appeared to have, and cultural messaging that equated worth with specific external markers. None of these forces announce themselves. They arrive through thousands of small moments of praise and disapproval that gradually shape a sense of what is worth wanting. Philosopher Harry Frankfurt distinguished between first-order desires, the things we want, and second-order desires, the things we want to want. Most people operate at the first-order level without ever asking whether getting what they want would actually satisfy them, or simply create a larger version of the same hunger. Strategic thinkers audit their own desires. They are willing to discover that some of what they thought they wanted was never really theirs, and they are willing to let it go, because continuing toward a destination that was never theirs would be the far greater loss. Way 6. You use discomfort as data. Most people treat discomfort as a signal to retreat. But Kelly McGonigal's research at Stanford showed that the stress response is not inherently harmful or helpful. It is a mobilization response. Whether it produces damage or performance depends almost entirely on how the person interprets it. People who see stress as evidence something is going wrong perform worse. People who see the same experience as evidence they are engaged with something that matters perform significantly better. Same biology, different meaning, entirely different outcome. Strategic thinkers have developed what might be called discomfort literacy, the ability to distinguish between the discomfort of a wrong direction and the discomfort of the right direction being harder than expected, between the anxiety of a genuine threat and the specific feeling of becoming someone you have not been yet, which always feels strange before it feels earned. Way 7. You think in systems, not just events. Most people think about their lives in terms of events, things that happened, outcomes that occurred. But most of what happens in a life is the result of systems, patterns of behavior, environment, and habit that operate continuously in the background and produce outputs whether or not the person is paying attention. Peter Senge identified what he called the structure that produces the behavior. The outcomes we experience are the predictable outputs of structures we have built or inherited. Change the structure, and you change the output. Leave it intact, and change only the surface behaviors, and the structure regenerates the original output through different mechanisms. Strategic thinkers ask not just what happened, but what system produced this. When they want something different, they do not try harder at the same behaviors. They redesign the system itself so that the desired outcome becomes the natural result of normal conditions rather than a heroic effort sustained against everything around them. Way 8. You are comfortable not knowing, but you do not stay there. Psychologist Ari Kruglansky documented the need for cognitive closure, the motivated desire for a firm answer paired with discomfort around ambiguity. His research showed that high need for closure produces faster decisions, but lower quality ones. The speed comes at the price of precision. Strategic thinkers have a lower need for closure. They can hold an open question without forcing it shut before the answer has arrived. But they do not stay in uncertainty. They actively work to reduce it. They run small experiments. They seek people who have navigated similar terrain. They build knowledge deliberately so that when the moment for a decision arrives, they make it from genuine earned clarity rather than rushed resolution or endless paralysis. If you have made it this far and these ways of thinking feel more like recognition than revelation, drop a comment with the number that hit hardest. I read every single one. Stay with this, because the 9th way ties everything together. Way 9. You have a relationship with your future self. Psychologist Hal Hershfield at UCLA used neuroimaging to show that when people think about their future self, the brain regions that activate are the same ones that activate when thinking about a stranger. Not themselves, a stranger. The future self is experienced as someone else entirely, someone whose needs feel abstract and irrelevant compared to the very immediate needs of the present. This explains an enormous amount. Why people spend money they intended to save. Why they stay in situations they know are wrong. It is not weakness or lack of discipline. It is a neural mismatch. The future self has no voice in the conversation. They are a stranger. But Hershfield found that when people develop a more vivid, emotionally inhabited sense of their future self, they make radically different decisions. They save more. They invest in what will matter in 10 years rather than optimizing only for today. The future self stops being a stranger and starts being someone they are genuinely responsible for. Strategic thinkers carry this relationship naturally. They ask not just, what do I want right now, but what will the version of me 10 years from now wish I had done today? And that accountability, vivid and personal and sustained, is what makes it possible to stay on a meaningful path when the difficulty peaks. Because the future self is waiting on the other side, and every decision either builds toward them or drifts away. So where does this leave you? 9 ways of thinking the world has largely failed to name, teach, or recognize as the strategic intelligence they are. Thinking about your thinking. Playing the long game instinctively. Treating beliefs as hypotheses. Reverse engineering outcomes. Knowing what you actually want. Reading discomfort accurately. Seeing the systems producing your results. Sitting inside uncertainty without collapsing it. Carrying a real relationship with the person you are becoming. None of these look impressive in the moment they are happening. None are rewarded by a culture that celebrates speed and the performance of certainty. But they are, according to decades of converging research, among the most reliable predictors of a life that is genuinely built rather than merely accumulated. And if reading this felt less like learning something new and more like finally having language for something you have always done, that is not a coincidence. It is a signal. The architecture for a genuinely intentional life is not something you need to build from scratch. It is already present inside you. The gap between the life you have and the life you want is almost never a gap in capability. It is almost always a gap in recognition. In trusting the ways of thinking that already run in you deeply enough to let them guide the decisions that actually matter. You were not thinking too much. You were not being impractical or slow or difficult. You were ahead. You have always been ahead. The only question left is whether you are willing to trust it. If this video gave language to something you have been carrying quietly, leave a comment with the way of thinking that felt most like you. I read every single one. And if someone in your life thinks this way and has never been told it is a strength, share this with them. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is the permission to trust their own mind. Subscribe to Psych Mind Inc. for more of this. We will see you in the next one.